Something that I like to remind people is that it is in recent time that we've come to believe as a collective that death was the end and that your
Mhm.
relationship with that person was over. And all of us are indigenous to some place, right? In those indigenous cultures and in that like ancient memory, that we can remind ourselves that actually that relationship does continue and you are able to, and what you could not do when they were in the physical body, you actually are able to continue conversations when they're in the energetic body.
Welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, grief and soul purpose coach, and fellow griever, Tara Accardo. Welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I am so thrilled to have you here. We were able to be connected through our Get Griefy collective group that we're both in, which I'm so grateful for. And you and I have kind of similar stories in some ways. And so I really just felt kind of a kinship to you through that. But then as we've just been talking, you're just such a beautiful energy, and the work you do is so valuable. And I'm just so excited to share both your story and your experience, but also just this beautiful light that you bring to the world through all of the very important work that you do. So a big welcome to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here, and a big hello to all the listeners and the watchers.
Thank you. Wonderful. Well, I love to start these off by having you just tell everyone a little bit about yourself. We'll get into the grief and loss and all of that, but
Yeah.
just kind of who you are, any fun facts about you, anything who maybe anything who anyone who doesn't know who you are in your story, how they can just kind of get to know you a little better.
Yeah. So my name is Sundari Malcolm. I'm originally from New York. I was actually raised between New York and a yoga ashram called Yogaville in Virginia,
Amazing.
and now live in Germany. And the travel is kind of wrapped up in the grief story as well. I am a grief expert, a birth, grief, and death doula, an author of the book Grief Gems, and the founder of a Healing Doula Academy, which is a virtual training program for those that are interested in becoming spiritually led grief and death doulas with a focus on Indigenous healing modalities.
Incredible. Okay, I want to dig into all of that. um,
Mhm.
Especially, with death doulas. I've had one, kind of almost two on the podcast before, but I think it's really fascinating for me. It's really fascinating work, and I think I don't know that it's like new, but I think people almost like grief coaching, sort of like people are getting
Mhm.
more familiar with it or starting to hear more about it. I think people are, they hear birth doulas and like that's a little more familiar. So I'd love to get there. And then how you sort of incorporate, ancient indigenous healing modalities and traditions into grief. But if you wouldn't mind, whatever you are comfortable sharing, just kind of walk us through your journey of grief and loss.
Yeah. So in 20, gosh, the years are going by so
I
fast.
know.
In 2000, oh, so it wasn't
Wow.
20 anything. In 2000, I was 20, and my mother was diagnosed with reoccurring breast cancer. So her breast cancer had come back for the second time. And I had gone to the University of Delaware and was still living in Delaware and moved back home to New York to be there with her, and was kind of thrown into the role of being a caregiver. I had no experience. I was my
Mhm.
mother's only child. My parents were divorced by that time. And for anyone who is a caregiver who's listening, you know that it comes with no rule book.
Right.
And so I spent the majority of my 20s caring for her. And at 27, my mother died from complications from breast cancer. And at 31, my father died from brain cancer. So he was at work and collapsed at his desk, unconscious.
Oh
And
my.
within a week, we were told that he had less than a year to live. And so he died when I was 31. And though I had been a caregiver, my background in work at the time in my 20s was I actually worked in public relations. I used to do event planning for football teams and record labels, and I was like as far away from the grief world as possible. But as I mentioned, I had been raised between New York and a yoga ashram. And so my parents had both been yogis and into the spiritual world, not what they did for a profession, but what they had found in their own 20s amidst their own grief. My mother had
Mm.
lost her mother when she was 27.
Oh my god.
And so I was raised with spiritual teachings. And so at 27, I spent the first year, being very honest, I write about this in my book, Grief Gems. I spent the first year on the couch drinking wine and watching the Food Network. And then after a year, I was like, okay, I need to start to regain some focus. And I knew that I wanted to take a yoga teacher training. And that kind of became the catalyst. Um, Taking a yoga teacher training led me to teach specific communities. And I started doing yoga for caregiving and yoga for cancer patients and yoga for the terminally ill.
Mm.
And moved into prenatal yoga and post labor. And so that began my birth doula work. And the death doula work came before grief doula work. That really became because I had been a caregiver for my mother. I was there at the end. She had hospice at home. And so she passed at home. And I am so grateful to this day for the hospice nurses that were there who knew enough to tell me to take pictures of her hands. We played Nina Simone the entire day. I gave my mother a massage.
Oh,
I had an aunt come and do Reiki over her. And so I saw what a really peaceful transition could look like.
wow.
And to have incense burning and candles lit and to be able to lay hands over her at the end, that changed how I saw what death could look like and could be. And while I knew that there were some that were lucky, like my mother, who had me and friends and family, there were also people who have no one, right? Or people who have family and friends and are not comfortable with them being there at the end.
Yeah.
And I think something that grief and the walk with it shows you, caregiving and the walk of that shows you, is just how many faces there are to this. And I think it cracks you open into a world of what is often underserved,
Yeah.
right? And transitions that are undervalued. And it became a mission of mine to make sure that whether you were coming in or leaving this earth, that you were being held and seen and cared for. And so that has become my work now 17 years later, which
Oh
is
my god.
what is time because it's
I
strange
know.
now.
Yeah. Oh my god, I literally started I could tear up right now. Hearing about, like, your mother's last day, so to speak.
Yeah.
How I've heard, like, vaguely some really beautiful last days like that or people talking about having that experience.
Yeah.
That's I'm not gonna say that's, like, my dream, but that's my dream, what you just
It's my
described.
dream.
How
Right? Like
incredible.
you,
I'm
and
so
I
blessed.
think it's why death doulas are beautiful because they do
Oh, wow.
introduce the idea that you can, in fact, design this. Like you
Yeah.
don't have to be at the mercy of. These are things that you can put
Right.
into place, and that's what death doulas help you do: is choose the music and choose who
Yep.
will be there and who will not, and whether or
Yep.
not you're incorporating faith-based or spiritual-based ceremony and ritual, and
Mhm.
all of that can be chosen.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah,
Yeah. What would you say to maybe someone here this might be a tough question, but, like, is there anything you would say to someone listening here that, let's say, had a loved one, I say pass, but it's just I'm trying to use more just straight up language, had a loved one
yeah,
die,
hmm
who, let's say it was more sudden and they
Mhm.
sort of like didn't have that choice, right? Because as you were
Yeah.
speaking, I was like, absolutely, like I agree. I do feel like there's choices, right? But let's say it's not
Yeah.
from a disease, or something
Mhm.
where they might be on home hospice or whatever. Like with my father,
Mhm.
he was in hospice, but it was the middle of the night. No one was there. But frankly, I've
Yeah.
said this before on the podcast. I don't think he would have wanted me there also because
Yeah.
I witnessed my mom's passing 6 months later or 6 months earlier. There was no way I
Mhm.
wasn't gonna be with her. That was like
Yeah.
I felt called to be there for her.
Yeah.
With my dad, it happened kinda sooner than we thought, but, like, also, I feel like that was very true to him. I don't knowing him, he wouldn't have wanted to, like, put me through that trauma, I think, to watch a
Yeah.
second parent die. So I think it
Yeah.
was like he kind of went out on his terms, so to speak. But,
Yeah.
I do know there's a lot of people listening here that might feel like they didn't get a choice in the matter, their loved one didn't get a choice in the matter, perhaps it was a
Mhm.
more I mean, death is traumatic, I know, but, like, let's say it was a more
Mhm.
traumatic death, I'll just leave it at that. What
Yeah.
would you say to someone feeling that in that case?
I think something that I like to remind people is that it is in recent time that we've come to believe as a collective that death was the end and that your
Mhm.
relationship with that person was over.
Yep.
And all of us are indigenous to some place, right? And it is in those indigenous cultures and in that like ancient memory that we can remind ourselves that actually that relationship does continue, and you are able to, and what you could not do when they were in the physical body, you actually are able to continue conversations when they're in the energetic body.
Yeah.
And so I think there is something really beautiful in incorporating ritual into your life. And whether that could be as simple as every morning when you wake up, lighting a candle and let that candle be in memory of, right? If it was
Mhm.
something as once a week when you sit down and pull out your journal, saying all the things, writing down without stopping, perhaps listening to
Yeah.
calming music, all the things that you wish you could have said, and let it just energetically be transferred onto that paper, right?
Yeah.
Having your own closing ceremony in your
Mm.
home or
Ooh,
out in nature.
I love
You
that.
know, you are able to, whether that be in the water, in a forest, on your balcony, in your bedroom, bring in items that remind you of that person, bring in music that reminds you of that person, light your candles and get really quiet and have your own goodbye. But all of these things are more important than this culture has given credence to. Right.
Yes.
And when we have energetic holes that we haven't quote unquote closed, that carries on with us. Right. It's why these
Mhm.
practices were so important, because it was the idea of energy always continues, and what you do not address will present itself later. And
Yeah.
so if you are feeling pulled to have a closing, have a goodbye, to say things that you wish you could have, like, I urge you to do so. You're being called for a reason.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful reminder. I love that idea of a closing ceremony. That's so beautiful. Because I mean, I can empathize with that in my own way. I didn't have this was partially because of COVID, but we didn't have funerals for my parents.
Mhm.
hardly were able to do a celebration of life, like even to this day. And
Yeah.
we've done little ceremonies with like each side of the family, but I felt a lot of guilt over that because I felt like they didn't
Mhm.
sort of get the recognition that they deserved. And I've had guests on the
Yeah.
podcast here talk about that too, where
Yeah.
they were like, they deserved something bigger and things like
Mhm.
that, and so I get that guilt so much, but
Yeah.
I think what I've also sort of realized as I've sort of gotten into my more spiritual side and embraced that is
Yeah.
like, yes, that like there's that ending and there's something to be said about that celebration, if you will, but like our connection with them transcends any human, like, association that we have with that, right? Like, that are
Absolutely.
there's would you agree with this that there's maybe, like there's ego tied with that, right? Like, we feel like their physical body, their life here in the physical world needs to be celebrated with with a quote funeral or with something like
Mhm.
that. And so I think that's what I've sort of like have been unpacking for myself over the last
Yeah.
several years is like, okay, yes, technically speaking, I feel some guilt around not giving them that, but also I've come to feel their presence and welcome that energy into my daily
Me
life that
too.
I've kind of also made peace with that. So,
Yeah.
I guess I don't know, I kinda wanna just kick that over to you. I guess I don't have a specific question about that, but, like, have you seen that or seen people sort of struggle with that
Well,
as
yeah, I
well?
think, there's you mentioned like as you're expanding into your own spiritual path, it's like when you're on the spiritual path, I think there becomes a real recognition and acknowledgement of there is so much more out there than we have been led to believe. And I
Yes.
think
Big time.
part of the path is having to like deprogram yourself from
1000.
everything that you have been raised and programmed with from the time you incarnated on this planet.
Yep.
And part of that guilt that you spoke of, that so many carry,
Mhm.
and that can be because there was a pandemic at play, that can be because the distance was just too far, that can be because it was sudden, right?
Yep.
For all of those reasons where you weren't able to be there or to offer to the physical body,
Mhm.
it is the programming that is drilling into your brain that you have done something wrong, because
Yeah.
everything has always told you that it all like ends with this big like ritual
Repent,
of
if you will,
burying.
yeah. Yeah.
And there's something so beautiful about the acknowledgement on the spiritual path of like, oh no, like that simply was just the physical body.
Yep.
And I do not have to keep carrying this burden that I have done something wrong. I did not. Their soul left. The
Yep.
physical body is doing what it needs to do. And now I can focus on moving into a relationship with them in this different realm. It's
Yep.
not the same. I know that as a griever, right? And that's not to
Of course.
invalidate the beauty of having them here in person.
Yeah.
But it's also not to invalidate the beauty of being able to walk forward on a different sort of dialogue with them. You
Yep.
know, you spoke about being there for your mother one way and your father another, and that resonated with me because I had a different relationship with both. I had a very complicated relationship with my father, and I know there's a lot of people listening who also have had complicated relationships with the person who passed.
Yeah.
And so something that I'm asked a lot is, well, because we did not die having had that hallmark. He did not die having had that hallmark moment with me where it was like,
Mhm.
I'm so sorry. And I
Mhm.
love you so much. And like wrapping everything up in a bow,
Closure,
right?
so
That's
to
what
speak. Yeah.
that like lifetime movie conversation that you expect that's going to happen, that does
It
not for
happened.
most of us.
Yep.
Um, and I had so much anger for so long because of that. And for myself more than anything, but I had to work on our relationship after. I could not bury that with him, right? The energy continues. And so
Yep.
I've had to, when we talk about Indigenous practices, have an ancestral altar in my house and sit at it
Mm.
and speak with him and journal to him and continue that relationship until it got to a place where it didn't feel so hard in my belly, right? And so
Right.
like painful in my heart. Those are also ways that you can continue, right? And good
Yeah.
reasons for them is maybe the relationship wasn't a loved one, maybe it was just a one, and you
Mhm.
need to figure out how to reconcile all of that.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for bringing that up too, just the we're I'm getting I'm so excited to get into the work that you do, and I wanna tap into this, the more, like, ancient, indigenous, healing modalities here in just a second, and so I wanna, like, focus on your losses, but also I just wanna say I'm so thankful you brought that up because I do know people here listening definitely have some complicated, as you mentioned, relationships. Even a couple of clients that I have are mourning the loss specifically of a parent, and they're really
mhm,
grappling with that. Maybe they didn't. speak to them for years,
Mhm.
prior to
Mhm.
the death, or found out that they were ill not long before their passing, so they didn't really have time to get that closure to sort of, get that hallmark moment, if you will.
Oh.
So, I think that's really, really important to acknowledge, and it can make the grieving experience that much more complex and difficult because
Mhm.
it's like you just feel like you're not going to get certain answers or whatever it is. So thank you so much for sharing that as well. And just
Mhm.
again, it's just a testament to how right we have for example two parents and like or siblings, however this applies to anyone here listening, but like those relationships are very sacred and very different in
Mhm.
their own way. And
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, I sort of when my parents died, like, it's really like 3 deaths is the way that I look at it. It's like the death of my mom
Mhm.
and mourning that relationship, the death of my dad and that relationship, and then the death of our,
Yeah.
like, family unit as well, which I also
Yeah.
know looks different for everyone. Because as you mentioned, your parents were divorced, so, just a
Mhm.
acknowledging that, but also remembering, that I think people forget we're grieving so much more than just, like, the absence of someone. Like,
Absolutely.
and then we wonder why we're struggling with our grief so much or whatever. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
but think about the magnitude of
Mhm.
of this loss and how many aspects of your life it has affected, and that is great. Um,
Yeah.
for a lot of people. So I would love to just get into this, again, incorporating these ancient indigenous modalities. So can you talk to me a little bit about you? So you've talked about it a little bit already, but and
Yeah.
alluded a little bit into how you got into this, but can you just elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I think for anyone here listening who's maybe and also myself, who is
Mm.
curious about that, sort of how you began to really tap into that work. It sounds like your parents sounded incredible, by the way, and they were very spiritual and very into a lot of this, even when you
Yeah.
were a lot younger. But how did you really start to embrace those practices, both like in your own life and then your grief work and those that you
Yeah.
work with?
So as I mentioned, I was raised with these practices.
Yeah.
However, as a teenager in my 20s, I was not applying any of them. Like you're like too cool for any of
Yeah.
this. And this was like way before yoga was mainstream. Like I was born in
Yeah.
1980. So I was just like the strange vegan kid who, did yoga. So you get to a certain age when you're like, I no longer tell people that this is part of what's
That's
happening at home.
amazing.
Um, and it was really when I was in the depths of my own grief that I was like,
Mhm.
oh, I really got to pull my shit together. Like
Mhm.
I was just, I mean, anyone who's a griever who's listening knows like the grief fog was so intense. And I had lost my anchor in my mother, and I really was like lost. And I started going back to yoga classes, and I was living in Manhattan at the time. And I started going back and taking classes, and it was when you're new to the grief, like silence is really hard, right? Silence is
Oh, God,
hard.
yeah.
Closing your
Avoidant
eyes
listening.
is hard. Um, and I had to ease into that. But what was welcoming was to be in a space where I didn't have to talk, but still be around people.
Mhm.
Um, to even if I didn't participate, to hear other people chanting Om and breathing, even if I couldn't access my own breath yet. Like
Yeah.
there was something about just putting myself in the environment that began to shift things for me. And when I took the training, because I took the training before thinking I was really going to be a yoga teacher, it was really like, I want to go on this retreat and then I'm going to take this training and I'm just going to learn all these amazing things. And I know a lot of people who take trainings for the same reason. It's just because you're learning all of the information. I didn't know yet what I would do with it.
Right.
But what I knew was how much it was helping me in my loss. It was helping
Mhm.
me feel grounded again. I was completely untethered at the time. It was making me feel like I was like tethered to earth again.
Yeah.
Um, Allowing me to get silent allowed me to get clear about like what I was ready to allow into this new version of myself and what I
Mhm.
wasn't. Um,
It's beautiful.
it I think moving my body, and this was before I became so educated on what energy centers were or why it was important to move and shift energy throughout your body. What I knew was that I didn't feel stuck anymore.
Yeah.
And what I knew was that I had started to have like physical issues that were presenting themselves because I was just sitting on the couch watching the Food Network and drinking wine and grieving, right? Which, in and of itself, if you are aware of the connection between grief and the body, then it sits in your lungs and in your small intestine. And I was having issues presenting itself in both. And when
Mm,
I began moving and paying attention to my health on a holistic level and incorporating like herbal medicine, I started to see that a lot of those issues were going away. And it was like, okay, I can't be sad and sick. So if I can't fix being sad, then I at least need to start working with my body.
mhm.
And when I could see that in working with my body, my grief had more space to be heard and to move and to ask me what it needed, is when I
Right.
was like, okay, these need to be applied to people who are grieving.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what kind of like set me off on the trajectory of I didn't just want to teach to the mainstream community, that I didn't just want to bring these modalities into, everyday Joe. I really
Mm.
wanted folks that were like me,
Yeah.
and folks that I understood what this felt like in their body. And because I had lived this and then applied it to my own grief, I knew how to help people with it. And it's not, I don't ever look at these practices, anything, as healing anybody, as much as I think it reminds you of the power that you have, and grief makes you feel powerless.
Yeah.
And I think when you incorporate these practices, which are all about you
Yeah.
and you from a very gentle perspective, um, I just think it opens up so much more for us as people who walk with loss.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Yeah, thank you also for mentioning. I mean, I talk about the mind body connection here fairly often on the podcast, one way or another, and just the importance of that. And I think um, that's difficult for people to tap into sometimes. But the way that
Yeah.
you just, articulated that, for me at least, makes a lot of sense and feels a little less intimidating, also, and just
Yeah.
understanding really how that is interconnected. Can you
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about you've already given a couple of examples about how little rituals or things that you can incorporate that are these, again, these beautiful indigenous healing modalities, sort of the
Mhm.
altar in your home. Are there any other like specific practices, perspectives, things that anyone here listening could maybe keep in mind, or try for themselves? Because I know a lot of people here listening are just like, I will try anything. I'll try anything that I haven't tried before. And that's what I'm so interested in, the work that you do and this perspective that you
Yeah.
have, because we haven't really had someone on the podcast here that can speak to, these ancient traditions,
Yeah.
and these modalities for healing. So I think that's so beautiful.
So I think something that's important to remember about indigenous practices, traditions, rituals, especially when it's related to grief, is two things. And one was that we were never supposed to do this alone, that
Mm. Ooh.
grief was supposed to be held in community. And it's important to remember that if you feel like you were doing this alone and failing, it's because you were trying to do something that you were not designed for. The second thing is that in order to truly move forward in this new version of yourself, and then in every version that will come after this, because what we know in grief is that this shifts, right? So
Mhm.
who you are now is not who you will be in a year or 2 years, and your grief will not be the same.
Yeah.
In doing so, then it requires you to really get to know yourself and know yourself on a holistic level.
Yeah.
It also requires you to come out of the mind. Our culture has, again, programmed us into keeping us on a feedback loop within the
Yep.
mind, right? And this is not to take away from talk therapy, because I do believe that there is huge value in it. But what we have forgotten when we come below the crown chakra, below the head,
Mhm.
is that there's so much of you still waiting to be accessed. And
Yeah.
if you don't give yourself permission to access them, you remain stuck up here. And so the anxiety, the ungroundedness, the anger, the frustration, all of it stays blocked within you.
Yeah.
And so within a Healing Doula Academy and how I work with my own clients and students, is remembering these practices that we've kind of taught ourselves that these are new age, and none of these are new age. They are ancient, right?
Opposite, in
But
fact.
we speak about the beauty of things like sacred sound. Why? Because sound is used for healing, and
Yeah.
frequencies can, in fact, infect your cells. So if we are walking around sad, angry, depressed, and frustrated, I'm not telling you to turn mainstream radio off. But how beneficial would it be if you spent 20 minutes listening to a healing frequency sound?
I
Because
love
it
doing that.
does, in fact, affect you on a cellular level, right?
Yes.
When we think about the idea of massage, we love that practice because we just get to relax, but you are actually full of energetic points. It's why acupressure and acumassage is so valuable, right? What if we actually, while watching a Netflix show, found that meridian that correlates to the lung and to the small intestine and massaged it while you were watching, right? These
Mhm.
are ways to like bring in these practices. Herbal medicine, a practice that goes back forever, but there are teas like holy basil, which is tulsi, right? Like oat straw, which is for hormone balance in the heart, hibiscus, all of these sorts of teas that you could be drinking on the regular that are, in fact, bringing this healing medicine into your body, right?
Mhm.
When we think about movement, every culture has implemented dance. And
Yeah.
if we're not implementing dance, then implement Tai Chi, yoga, right? Move your
Mhm.
body, open up the pathways.
Yeah.
Ancestral altars are something that I really think is so easy to impart. Now, everyone doesn't have a space. I'm looking to the side because mine's over here, but everyone doesn't have a space that they can set up and like keep out of the way of children
Mhm, mhm.
or dogs or what have
That's
you. But it could be on a
yeah,
shelf on a bookcase, right? It
yeah.
could be in a shoebox and you take it out in your bathroom while you close the
Mhm.
door to keep everyone out. It can be whatever you need it to be, but it is a
Yeah.
place for you to sit at, to connect with those who have crossed over, but also to remind yourself of what you have been through, but what you need now, what you think you will
Yes.
need moving forward. It's a time to like sit with your breath. The breath is known through every culture across the planet as being life force energy.
Yep.
When you are grieving, you are depleted of life.
Mhm.
And you can bring that back into the body by intentionally breathing. And that might feel scary for some grievers, which I totally get.
Yeah.
But you can also do this in a passive way, right? Sit at your altar, stare at a candle. You don't have to close your eyes and count as you breathe. Count to 10 one way and then back. But
Amazing.
these sorts of things that we think are, we've just forgotten them, right? And so
Mhm.
part of the academy is training people how to remember these, but also
Right.
how to use them to move people, to move themselves through loss,
Yes.
through transitioning, through death.
Beautiful reminders. I was like, preach to all of these as, as you were talking, but also kind of just kicked my butt into gear a little bit because now I'm like, oh, wait a second. Okay, what can I maybe go back and like look at again a little bit differently? Any
Yeah.
little like tweaks I like to make. And I get excited about that. I get curious about
Yeah.
that. And checking in with myself every so often about what feels good, what might need a little tweak, like I said. And I
Yeah.
actually want to touch on this. And I think even before we hopped on, I think this was like something as our sort of pre-episode we were chatting about maybe
Mhm.
just touching on this these different versions of yourself. You just touched on that
Mhm.
as well. And
Yeah.
a lot of we hear this all the time. We're kind of like the version that we were pre-loss and
Yeah.
post-loss. I think it's not as black and white as that per
Yeah.
se. But can you talk to me a little bit about that? Any perspective that you have on that? But I'm also very curious just in your own journey,
Yeah.
what sort of that for lack of a better term, older version of you, right? And then like how that has evolved for you specifically since the losses of your parents.
Yeah. Okay. I, I hope I cover it all, but I'm going to start with this. I laugh a lot about how many versions of myself there have been.
Yeah.
And I mentioned like Yes, I had a little yogi lifestyle, but I was also a huge party girl in my 20s. And then worked for the NFL and record labels and,
That's
planned
wild.
parties for a living. Um, and could not have envisioned that this is what I would be doing now. They could not have been further apart.
Yeah.
I think what I allowed myself to do, which is what I urge all grievers to allow themselves to do, is that I allowed myself to be transformed by it,
Mhm.
instead of resisting how grief was sharpening me, right? Was
Yeah.
sculpting me.
Yeah.
And I think the resistance that is natural, because so many of us want the older version,
Mhm.
and can feel nostalgic about the older version, right? And miss who we were
Long for
pre
that.
having to carry all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like I was so much lighter back then, right? I could have
Mhm.
conversations without talking about grief and death and loss. I was, I was just like floating through life. Like
Yeah.
that has
Blissfully
changed.
unaware. Me too.
Blissfully freaking unaware. Okay.
Oh,
So that
same.
has completely shifted. And so I understand the resistance to, the wanting of, and nostalgic for. I get all of it. But I also think there's something when we are ready for it, that if you allow it
Mhm.
to move you,
Mhm.
and to move through you rather than like pushing you places,
Mhm.
you can land in some really amazing places. When I think about my colleagues in the grief, death, end of life field, all
Yeah,
of them have walked through grief and loss themselves.
of course.
And it's one of the reasons why I love working in this field and meeting those of us, because to hear the stories that have come through these people. So when you think about like, and I'm not saying everyone has to wind up working in this, but what
Yes,
I
yeah.
am saying is like 90% of those people had no idea that they would land here. When I think about how many people gave up jobs and homes and relationships and shifted it all. When I lived in Miami in my 30s. And I always say that it is because of grief. It's because of, and I say this quote unquote, and I hope people understand me when I say this, the freedom that came after having lost my parents.
Yeah.
And that can be a touchy subject for some, but we are often bound by family expectation,
Mhm.
right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
and we are often still making decisions, and I know this as a death doula, way into our deathbed, that are to keep others happy. And though losing both parents left me as an orphan, which was ground shaking in and of
Yeah.
itself, what it did do was like, oh, I have no one to answer to. um there was like no one that was going to tell me no, and that was terrifying, but it was also like,
Yeah.
well, I guess I'm just
Annoying.
going to try this. And
Interesting
I think
feeling.
about
Yeah.
like the girl that left New York City and I moved to Miami, who I traveled the world for years. I sold everything in 2019 and bought a school bus, turned it into a tiny home, and drove around the states. I
Stop.
left
That's
a shitty
amazing.
marriage because I was like, damn, will you steal this piece that I have built up?
Wow.
Lived on an island in Curacao, wrote a book, moved to Germany, which is where I live now, and remarried to the most wonderful, peaceful human being on the planet. And it's like all of this is really because I've allowed myself to feel free, even, and to like keep meeting versions of myself, and to keep allowing her to exist,
Yeah.
right? Like that old me is gone, and that is sad. And I suggest people to have a ceremony for her, for him.
Mm. Mhm.
Have a sit down with that version of yourself and meet her and tell her how you're doing now, and thank
Yeah.
her for being there. Thank him for being there. Um, but I've allowed each version to show up. And not all of them have been productive and clear-headed. Like some of them made terrible mistakes and choices, right?
Yeah.
Like
Same.
some of them were real messy, and that's okay. They all had to exist too. But I think that with each version that shows up and each layer of grief that excavates itself for you, because it will,
Mhm.
is to allow it to flow. And I know that that sounds easier said than done, but
Right.
it really is the only way to manage grief. There's a real surrender that has to come in being a griever.
Makes sense.
And it's meaning like I am not setting anything in stone. I don't know if these friends are going to be here. I don't know
Mhm.
if this relationship is going to be here. I don't know if this job will be here because my grief is shaping me.
Yeah.
And so, like, continue to build your life around who shows up because sometimes you have to delete and edit
Yeah.
and fire folks.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the cold, cruel
Mhm.
reality of the situation. It's true, there's so many things that we have to or feel forced to at least, like, reevaluate, whether or not we even realize we're having to reevaluate them at the time, but I've
Mhm.
definitely gone through that, or, I think a lot of people I see this a lot on social media and stuff too, they're just like, "I'm shocked at who have not shown up for me," and I'm
Yeah.
pleasantly surprised by the people who have.
And
And
isn't
I
that part of the grief you talked about, right? The other
Yes.
losses. It's like all of your
Oh, yeah.
relationships shift. Like I don't
Mhm.
have all of the same friends that I had back then. And there are
Yeah.
so many angels that have popped up that I would not have
Mhm.
expected to.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that, grief is tricky.
Yeah.
And this is like this is an interesting path to walk.
Mm.
And I always like say to myself and say to people is like I'm just going to continue to be interested
Mhm.
and continue to allow it to be what it needs to be because sometimes it needs something different than
Yeah.
another time.
Every day could need something different. Every moment for those people here listening, maybe in the earlier stages, I sort of
Oh
like
my
to say,
God,
and I
yeah.
don't mean 5 stages. I mean just like earlier days, I guess, of
Yeah.
grief, depending on how recently you lost somebody. And that I think was one of the most, like, exhausting parts for me
Hmm.
personally, one of the most confusing parts, one of the most, like, "Oh my god, I'm so over this" parts was, like, it required and demanded something different from me every single day or multiple moments or whatever it was, but the things that saved me were a lot of what you have said today, the journaling, um, the curiosity for life, about myself, about who am I now as a quote orphan, because I can
Yeah.
unfortunately relate to you in that way. Um, Movement. Oh my God, taking my dog out for a walk, even though she was like 19, she couldn't really walk
Hmm.
anywhere. But even just being forced to
Yeah.
take her outside was
Yeah.
something. Going on a walk by myself when I could,
Yeah.
it was like meditation for me and reminder to everyone here.
Hmm.
Walking can be meditative.
Can be a meditation.
That is a
Washing
form of
the
meditation.
dishes can be a
It doesn't
meditation.
Yes, like, it doesn't have to be so, like, mainstream and so, like, "Okay, I have to
No.
sit here, I have to close my eyes, I have to" this whole, like, kumbaya
Yeah.
process. It's like, "No, no,
No.
no," like, that can get curious about that because
Yeah.
it's like we've been saying, it's so much bigger than us in so many ways, and, oh my god, we could go on multiple different episodes about this, I think. Are there any what kind of, like, tips or, strategies, recommendations, or even just mindset shifts, kind of perspective shifts, would you give to someone here listening that, is maybe really kinda, like, stuck in the past, longing for the
Yeah.
past,
Okay.
wishing
I
they had done some things differently, and then, like yeah, or it's just kind of worried about the future and just mourning the future that they maybe, aren't gonna get to have now?
I think one thing I like to remind myself is the word practice, right? These are
Mhm.
breathing practices, movement practices, ancestral
Yes.
practices. All
Great
of them
point.
have the word practice because it literally must be practiced in order for it to be beneficial.
Yep.
What I often hear is people say, I can't meditate because my mind's all over the place. I don't want to deep breathe. I can't move because of XYZ. I'm not saying those issues aren't valid, but it's
Right.
because that is your practice, is staying in the head, shallow
Mm.
breathing, not moving a lot. It is what your
Oof.
mind and nervous system is accustomed to. That's what it knows. So when you sit down and try to give it something else, we spoke about the ego earlier, the ego will
Yeah.
fight back and your
Yep.
body will tell you, like, nope, I don't get it. I have to get up.
Yep.
You have to train your nervous system to relax. And that
Mhm.
can feel really frustrating. However, I think this goes back to reminding yourself, this is the thing I have control over. I don't have control over what grief is going to feel like for me day to day. I
Yep.
don't have control over what happened and what this is going to look like 5 years ago, 5 years ago, 5 years from now. But
Right.
in this moment, and maybe it's when I set the alarm on my phone to go sit down for 15 minutes, this is when I know that I can train my nervous system to understand what rest and ease feels like again. This is
Yeah.
when I can train my body to remember what being grounded feels like. This is when I can train my diaphragm, which is in fact a muscle, to expand to a large enough capacity that I can begin to take deep breaths, because it is my programming that makes my diaphragm only go like this, which means I only take shallow breaths, which means I stay in a state of fight or flight. The
Yep.
connection between your body and your emotions is really strong. And so if you can't get ahead of the emotion, then you can get in the now of the body and say, I'm going to set an alarm on my phone. And for 1 minute, I'm going to practice deep breathing. And I'm just going to count to 5 on the inhale, 4 on the exhale, 4 on the inhale, 6 on the exhale. The exhale should always be longer than your inhale.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to move my body slower than I even think is slow.
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
just going to light a candle, and instead of closing my eyes, I'm going to stare at it for a few minutes. Because
Mhm.
what you're not recognizing in that, it's not a woohoo thing. It actually has been scientifically proven that it changes the waves in your brain. It affects your theta and gamma waves in your brain. So these are things, right? These are not woo woo new age practices. Most
Yeah.
of these have been scientifically proven if that's the way that your brain likes to retain information. And for those who are more esoterically inclined, then this has been going on since the beginning of time. These
Right.
practices work. And when we look at where the state of our society is when it comes to health and wellness and care for self or community, then really we should be doing the exact opposites.
Mhm.
Right? So we should be going back. We should be reclaiming. We should not be thinking that these are practices for other people. These are
Right.
practices for you, and they
Yeah.
are easy and free, and
I'm
you can
literally I
do
was
them really simply at home. And it really is just like, get out of your own way. Stop saying that you can't do it. You have to understand that you must practice. And eventually, with time, yes, when you sit down, your brain might race for the first 5 minutes, but it actually might calm down for the sixth, seventh, and eighth.
Yep.
Your breathing might be shallow at first, and then maybe month 2, you're like, wow, I'm breathing a lot deeper than I used to. You are
Yeah.
helping yourself with your loss.
Yes. Girl, yes. I'm
Mhm.
laughing at all of this. I know this to be true from my own experience, and everything you just said, I resonate with it so much. I think that's you just tapped into something so great there. I don't think we like give ourselves enough time, or we get frustrated that our grief is hanging around so long or whatever. For me, I was like, okay, I'm going to take the pressure off of myself because I know this grief is always going to be with me. I'm
Yeah.
always going to be salty that my parents
Yeah.
died. I'm never going to be happy about that, right?
Yep.
But that doesn't mean I'm not going to live a happy life. That doesn't mean I'm devoid of joy and I'm
Mhm.
going to now keep myself stuck because of that or because
Mhm.
I feel guilty for living. It never
Mhm.
that was never going to be me ever.
Yeah.
I was like, "I refuse." So, I think that's just beautiful things to literal, tangible things that you just provided everyone here.
Mhm.
So, thank you so much to
Yeah.
practices and great point about practices. Thank you so much for saying that. I think that's something we all
Yeah.
forget, that it's not like, yes, it's a day-to-day practice, but, like, just like any habit we might be trying to form or whatever, like, that takes time and
Yeah.
patience and compassion. And it's not like we're trying to do these practices like if we were to do them outside of grief, it could even take us a hot minute to get our head around. But
Oh,
then add
absolutely.
grief on top of it, like, we might be asking a lot from ourselves or it can feel that way. Um,
Yeah.
which is I think why it's because of that that I'm like, "Great, so take the pressure off of yourself." and not put any timeline on your grief or timeline that you have to like have these quote practices figured out right
Yeah.
away, knowing that each day could feel a little bit different. Like I try and like, for example, do breath work for me is like for sure every single day.
Yeah.
Again, if I'm like working on the computer or something, I'm like, when was the last time I took like a really deep breath? Hasn't been for a
Yeah.
minute. Let me go and do that. Or I get up like every hour and a half.
Mhm.
I've literally had to
Mhm.
set an alarm for myself. You're gonna laugh at me. I do squats. I do
Yeah.
something around the house. I walk, I get away from my computer, just these little things that even outside of my grieving experience, I do because I know my body needs it. I cannot just
Mhm.
stay stagnant in this chair
Yeah.
doing computer work all day. And so it's just a matter of for me at least, it's finding what has been useful and beneficial to me, knowing that that can
Mhm.
and will evolve and change because we are going to
Yeah.
be many incredible versions and iterations of ourself and but that doesn't have to be scary. That can be something
Mhm.
that's actually like super amazing and empowering and the fear of the unknown, that's been coming up for me a lot lately, not so much with myself, just
Yeah.
like there's just a lot out there, I think.
Yeah.
I've been hearing it a lot on podcasts, this like fear of the unknown and that there's a lot of discomfort there for people. And so
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious what your sort of like perspective is on this too, but I feel like, definitely there's like collective grief in a lot of ways, but I also
Mhm.
sort of feel like while a lot of people are staying stuck, a lot of people are waking up too. So it's like
Yeah.
it's a really wild time to be alive. I don't know. there's a
No,
lot going
my friends and I were just laughing the other day because I was like, I don't know what soul contract I signed before I
It's
came down here
same.
that I have landed in 2025 in the midst of all of this.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is when you speak about collective grief,
Yeah.
and excuse me, 'cause I have a bit of a cold I'm getting over.
Yeah, of course.
There is so much grief being held in the collective
Yeah.
because every single day people are being hit with shifting something,
Mhm.
shifting planetary changes, shifting laws, shifting
Yeah.
cabinet members, whatever you want to think about, right? Your
Yeah.
rights, your civil liberties, things are shifting in real
Mhm.
time. And there's a lot of fear in that. And what I find interesting is that, and this is my personal opinion, I think
Yeah.
grievers, if you have found yourself here as someone who's been walking through grief, I honestly believe that we are way showers.
Yeah.
And that there are so many people who are going to be searching for how do they hold what we have been forced to hold,
Ooh.
right? Who
Yeah.
are going to need a guide as to what does empathy really look like when it's embodied, right?
Mhm.
And not just when we're talking about it.
Mhm.
um, that are needing somebody to speak to what feels stuck in the body. And so when people talk to me about like, how do I show up in this time? And especially when I'm talking to grievers, it's like, understand this little magical power that you have, which is being able to help your communities and your friends in ways that you probably did not realize you were so gifted in,
Yeah.
because not everybody has felt in their body what loss feels like, what sudden shifts feel like, what the domino effect of having the rug being pulled out from you looks like. And so while grief might be felt from a physical loss, you are walking around with so much education on what it will feel like for others who are feeling collective loss.
Yeah.
And that's not a burden that everyone wants to carry. But when those who are asking for how do I show up in this time of this resistance, it's like,
Mhm.
you have been armed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing, I think, that a lot of us carry right now. And so
Mhm.
I think like, yes, that fear exists, and I believe it's going to get louder. And it's why I am so adamant about to training your nervous system to remain calm so that you are observing and not absorbing what is happening around you right now.
Yeah.
You are going to have to become you're your own leader in this time. You're going to have to become like the captain of your own ship.
Yeah.
And part of that is keeping yourself real grounded and keeping your channels clear enough that you can be discerning about the information that's coming into you. And
Mm.
so it is imperative to me that people are breathing and meditating,
Yeah.
and that you do not look at these as things that are self-care practices, but they are survival tactics in this
Oh,
time.
yeah.
Um, so I don't know if I answered your exact question.
Oh, yes, you did, and then some. That was that really hit home for me, and yeah, with the day and age of social media that we're in, and oh my gosh, the negativity that can come through
Mhm.
that, and I've experienced it a little bit myself, but I see it all the time with other people and other creators,
Yeah.
and just or just comments, and oh my god, there's a lot to be said about social media. That truly is another episode for another day. But,
Mhm.
we really, I think, have to protect our energy. Social media side, have to
Um,
be very mindful and, dare I say, protective and just aware of our
oh
energy
yeah,
and
say
our
it. We need to be
oh,
very
Lord,
protective about your energy.
never.
I like to I imagine this started when I was younger, but Glinda, the good witch. I like
Mhm.
you think of that like bubble that she had around her.
Yes.
It's like imagine yourself in a bubble, and when you leave your house, before you leave your
Oh,
house, before you get on a Zoom call, before you engage in conversation at the grocery store, it's like put yourself in a bubble, and that needs to be what you become like intentional about maintaining these days.
yep.
It's
Yeah.
just like how peaceful and centered can it be in here, in spite of, because it's not negating anything, but in
Of
spite
course.
of all that is happening,
Yeah.
so that you can handle all that's coming. Because especially as a griever, this shit can start to feel real overwhelming when you're trying to manage
Oh,
loss
yeah.
and then,
Yep.
right? Um, and so, yeah, fortify yourself,
Yes. Oh, I
spiritually
love
arm yourself is what I call
yes.
it.
I love that so much. This has been such a beautiful conversation. I am so grateful
Mhm.
for you for coming on, being so vulnerable and sharing your story, of course, but also just these beautiful teachings and lessons and practices and everything that you have
Mhm.
spoken about today. And I could go on with you for like another hour about this and just dig
Yeah,
into it
this
even
was
more.
great.
I just am so grateful to you. And if anyone wants to get connected with you, work with you, join the academy, perhaps get your book, where can they find you? And this will all be linked in the show notes, by the way.
Yeah, so you can find me at a healingdoula.com. A healingdoula.com has all of my services that are for the individual, the family, or the organization. I
Perfect.
also have my products listed there, so you can find my book. I offer staycations for grievers, which are guided at-home retreats, wellness retreats. I partnered with My New Roots, who's provided amazing recipes. And it's just a really incredible holistic day, 2 day, or 3 day that you can enjoy. And a Healing Doula Academy is listed on the site. And so you can see the entire curriculum. You can meet some of the fantastic guest teachers. That is a self-paced and virtual academy. And
Love
it's for
that.
everyone who's interested in becoming a grief and death doula that is spiritually led and trained in Indigenous healing modalities. And it's going
Incredible.
really well. We've got amazing workshops and gatherings, and I'm really proud of that curriculum. It has come from 44 years of
Wow.
embodiment, and it felt like something really beautiful to birth into this world.
Yes, it sounds so expansive and so
Mhm.
just again tapping into something like that's the theme of the day, I guess, something so much bigger than ourselves and really
Yeah.
getting back to our grounded in our roots and those ancient modalities. There really is something to be said about that. I've really started to explore that more in my own grief
Um,
experience in these last few years. And it's funny because my mom was really into that as well before she died, and I was too young and too in my own head to appreciate it and understand it. But I'm like, you know what? I'm discovering it now.
they're
When I was
always
meant to,
waiting.
I like to think. I was very led. Thank you, mom. And,
Yeah.
um, and it really is so eye-opening in the best way, and it is really something, dare I say, fun to get curious
Yeah.
about, and
It
put into
is.
practice in your own life. And like you said, it's free. It doesn't take a lot, and it's just yeah, there's so much fluff, there's so much just external noise and everything in the world that we live in nowadays. So I think just
Yeah,
sometimes getting out of that, stripping that away and getting back to like the essence of like who we are as an individual, as a
absolutely.
collective and all of that. It's so important. It's so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Sundari, thank you so much for being here today. I am so appreciative
Thank
of your
you.
time. And it was just such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone who's listening.